Well, welcome and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the webinar, Record Keeping for Forage and Grassland Management. My name is Ellen Crane. I'm the Extension Coordinator for the Beef Cattle Research Council, and I will be your moderator for tonight. This session will last for approximately 1 hour, but may go longer depending on the number of questions you've got for us later during the question and answer period. If you're on Twitter, you can tweet along with us using the hashtag #BeefWebinar. We are recording this session and I will email out the link of the recording to everyone that registered in a couple of days. So if you miss hearing anything tonight or you want to watch it again later, you can do that. Of course, you'll be able to hear and see tonight's presenters, but we can't hear or see you. If you want to communicate with us, you can type into the Q&A or into the chat window you'll see in your meeting controls. Yeah, feel free to send in any questions that you have throughout the hour and we will answer everything at the end of all of our presentations. If your internet connection is a bit slow this evening, it might help to close other programs that are using the internet on your device. Also closing the webcam window. So the video, which means you won't see us, but hopefully it'll make the audio come through a bit more clear for you. This is what we will be covering tonight. You will hear from 3 speakers that will be speaking about record keeping for forage and grassland management. And then we'll open it up, of course, for a question and answer. So with that, perfect. Yes, Lynn, you are on time. So first, I am going to do just a quick overview of the resources that we have available on beefresearch.ca. That includes forage records for record keeping. We have those in levels 1 through 3. So starting with some introductory levels and ending with some more advanced information. The topics range from range health, winter feed inventory and stored forages, and carrying capacity and animal unit months. And they're all available on beefresearch.ca. So feel free to check those out after the webinar. The speakers this evening will also be mentioning briefly the carrying capacity calculator that's available for free on beefresearch.ca. Just to go over this quickly, it'll be mentioned again, but the carrying capacity calculator uses 2 different methods to determine the animal unit months for based on the amount of grass that you have. So the first method uses estimates based on the provincial forage production guides, or method 2 uses field-based sampling, and you can choose to do either one of those. From that, you will be able to calculate your forage supply, your utilization rate, if you know your pasture size, and this will help you to determine your animal unit months or your total animal unit days, which I'm sure will be explained a bit better than I can do that right at the moment. But before we get into our presenters, we're going to do a couple of polls just to learn a bit more about those of us that have joined us this evening. So first of all, where are you joining us from this evening? Are you in the Atlantic region, Ontario, Quebec, the Prairies, British Columbia, or perhaps you're one of our international registrants? Okay, just a couple more seconds here. Those of you that are still awake with us on the East Coast, thanks for hanging out with us this late in the evening. All right, I think I'll end the polling here. So largely your audience is from the Prairies, 70%, followed by not closely, but followed by British Columbia, Ontario, and then everybody else. So we're glad to have you all here for joining us here this evening. Okay. Second question, what is your annual stocking rate of your pastures? Is it 0 to 50 animal unit days per acre, 50 to 100 animal unit days per acre, 100 plus animal unit days per acre, or no idea? A couple more seconds here to get your answers in. Okay, so pretty even split here on no idea leading, or 0 to 50 animal unit days per acre, followed by 50 to 100 or 100 plus. Okay. So with that, I will be handing things over to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Brian Boyd. Ryan is a family farmer from Forest, Manitoba, who is passionate about soil health, forage efficient cattle, and no-till cropping systems. As a 2019 Nuffield Scholar, Ryan traveled the world investigating different grazing systems and has brought many insights home, including the practice of total grazing. Ryan is passionate about all things farming and grateful for the opportunity to farm alongside his wife, Sarah, and kids, Piper and Bingham. Tonight, Ryan will be speaking about the tools he uses on his operation for grazing management. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Glad to be here. Hopefully there'll be something useful from what I have to share here. Just get my screen share up and running. How's that look? Are we?
Looks good.
We're good to go. Okay. I'm operating on my laptop doing a PowerPoint, so hopefully I'll have things running smoothly. So yeah, as Ellen said, we farm just north of Brandon, Manitoba. Forest is our hometown. South Glanton Farms is what we call ourselves. We've recently launched a grass-fed beef direct marketing business called Boyd's Beef, but that's our family there. Mom and dad, my sister Janelle, Sarah, and Piper and Bingham. And I think Connor's online here tonight too. Connor English, he's our main man on the farm. He's with us every day. He's as much part of the family as everybody else. So shout out to Connor. And I guess probably one of the reasons why maybe I received the nod to be on the panel is, as Ellen said, I've recently completed my traveling as a Nuffield Scholar, looking at grazing ruminants and just how we can get more of those in our farming systems here in Western Canada. So just a shameless plug for Nuffield Canada. Anybody that's young and ambitious and easily excited about agriculture, this is something you should look into, nuffieldcanada.ca. So what does record keeping look like on our farm? There's five main areas of record keeping that I would never profess to say that we have any of these done to perfection, but this is certainly what we're trying to keep record of. Rainfall, pasture inventory, pasture productivity, biological indicators, and animal performance. And all of that comes together to hopefully produce a profitable system with desirable environmental outcomes and a high quality of life for the family. So it's interesting to me that almost half, 40% of the people here had no idea what their stocking rate was. And I think that is absolutely critical to designing a profitable grazing system. I think Steve will talk about that here later tonight. But that was something that was really hammered into me on my Nuffield travels. I spent an afternoon with Jim Garish, and he recommended taking like a pasture inventory every 2 weeks. You need to know how much forage you have, how much feed you have, And then hand in hand with that is the rainfall, knowing where you sit, how close to a drought or how far from a drought are we? What is the buffering capacity of future growth reconciled with what growth we have on the ground? And further to that, like effective rainfall is even more important than the rainfall itself. So we're trying to watch for water infiltration, trying to maximize that effective rainfall. So pasture productivity, what does that look like on our farm? We like to measure that in terms of animal unit days per acre. So a couple of years ago, we were running around 60 animal unit days per acre. It was drier. We were kind of 2 back-to-back years that were drier. And then with some management tweaks this year to a different style of grazing, we've been able to get that up over 100 on average. And I really think on high quality land that 150, 200 animal unit days per acre are not out of the question with good management. So how do we record this? When we're out in the field, we have a WhatsApp chat group. We snap a picture of the area that we're going to graze. Can take pictures of the forage, add it to that chat group as well for records, pictures of the cattle. And then back in the office, that gets transferred into a Google Sheet that we can reconcile at the end of the year and tally up just what the grazing days per acre were. And other things that we keep track of, like the date of grazing, the density, the stock density that we were grazing at. And that's something I'll just briefly mention to give a little bit of context what I'm talking about. Like we've shifted over to a grazing system of ultra high stock density grazing. So multiple moves per day, lots of benefits to grazing like that. So we've experimented with different apps on the phone to try and keep track of grazing records, like the grazing chart kind of on the app deal, and we keep reverting back to like a spreadsheet based record. It's just simple. We can tailor it to our own needs, and it's free, so it just seems to work. Keep it simple. So as I said, when we're out in the field, we will use an area calculator app on the phone. This particular one that we use here is, I think it's just called Area. The picture is this blue and white picture you see in the top corner on this screenshot. So bring that up. You can walk around or ride on the quad, tag each corner of the paddock that you're going into. It tells you the area, take a screenshot. We then send it to the WhatsApp chat group, say that all of our pastures are numbered or lettered. So we put the name of the pasture or the paddock, how many moves within that area for that day, and then send it to the group message. And it works very well for not only record keeping, but if different people are moving the cattle day to day, you know exactly where things are at, what they got, how much area they received yesterday, and if any tweaks need to be made, it's easy to manage that on the fly. And as you can see, this here's picture of the, just on the wall in the shop, we have some Google Map images that are blown up so that we can draw the paddocks on it, where the water lines are. Just makes it simple for planning the moves. I forgot to look at the time when I started, so if you might have to come on and nudge me when I'm getting up on time here, Ellen. So another thing that we try to keep a reasonably good handle on, we don't have as good a handle as we should, and that's something we're going to be improving this year in terms of regular weighing, just to make sure that the performance is where we want it to be on the cattle, particularly the yearlings. Because at the end of the year, we kind of want to know a gain per acre when we're trying to figure out our gross margins. We need to know those numbers. And we're always assessing the cattle for body condition, just to see how they're handling the grazing program, if they're adding fat cover or declining condition, and adjusting accordingly as we go. And again, as I say, we're monitoring constantly in our grazing program. You can get carried away looking at the numbers on the spreadsheet. The results on the spreadsheet have to reconcile in the field. Are we accomplishing the landscape goals, the animal performance goals? All of that has to come together to work as a whole. So some of the biological indicators that we look at, we have benchmark soil tests on every field, every quarter section, or some of them have 2 or 3 different spots on them that we've been benchmark soil testing for 20 years. So we can tell over time if there's any major changes in nutrient content, organic matter, pH, that sort of thing. We have one site on the farm that is a carbon benchmark test that Blaine Jurtis did with the Soil Carbon Coalition protocol. So we tested that several years ago, and then again 3 or 4 years later, so that we're looking for change over time in carbon bulk density. So that there's some interesting results there, what we're able to achieve with the grazing program. And then of course the leading indicators of landscape function, we're looking for that plant density is increasing on the ground, that litter cover is at a desirable level and decomposing on the soil surface. The ground is covered so that we're in a position to soak in all the rain, as much rain as possible. And that also relates to the surface roughness. Like, we don't want to have a smooth surface where the water hits it and runs off. And forage quality, this is another one that it is really fascinating to watch the forage quality change over time. When we plant down a new field of forage, it seems the first year or two, the mineral content of that forage is much lower than 3 or 4 or 5 years into this grazing program. So that's another one that we like to watch. And we have in the past tested monthly, and then we kind of went away from that, and we're starting that up again this year. We tested every couple of months last summer just to monitor the quality changes over the summer, and that is something we're going to continue to do this year. And I think that's about all I had on my PowerPoint here. So thank you. I look forward to questions. You can find me on Twitter, Glanton Boyd. Connor's on the Instagram on South Glanton Farms. You can give him a follow. He's on there pretty much every day, so you can kind of get an inside look of what's going on day to day on the farm. And we also do have a website there. So not sure if I rushed that a little bit or how we're doing for time.
I think you're right on for time.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. If anyone thought of some questions for Ryan during the presentation, feel free to drop those into the chat or into the Q&A, and we will answer those after all of our presenters. Okay, so our next speaker is Jeremy Brown. Jeremy is an agrologist with Ducks Unlimited Canada, based in Battleford. This involves working with ranchers and farmers to promote healthy grasslands as nesting habitat for waterfowl. What enhances the sustainability of grasslands benefits the agriculture industry, the landscape, and wildlife. Jeremy was raised on a grain and cattle farm near Cutknife, Saskatchewan. He lives on the family homestead with his wife Marla and their 2 children. They operate a custom grazing business. Tonight, Jeremy will be speaking about stocking rate benchmarks and the value of grazing records. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. I appreciate the opportunity to participate and share some of my experiences, and it's a pleasure to be presenting with Ryan and Steve this evening. My presentation is going to be sort of 2 separate parts. I'm going to talk first about where to find and how to use some benchmarks for stocking rate. And then I'll talk a little bit more about my experience with record keeping and planned grazing. So for the most part, most of us have a pretty good handle on the carrying capacity of our pastures based on our past experience or local knowledge, or maybe the records that we're keeping. And those are going to be the best measures for any individual pasture. But in some cases, we may not have that information. Maybe we're taking over or setting up a new pasture. And so then we can look to the provincial stocking rate guides. So I'll briefly show you a couple of examples. In Saskatchewan, we have, for tame pastures, we have the initial stocking rate guide recommendations. This publication is a couple of decades old, but it's still the go-to for tame pasture stocking rates. The rates use tables that consider the forage species, the soil zone, the soil texture, the age of the stand, and also the condition of the stand, as well as fertility. So all of those things are going to impact your productivity, of course. And so for each species, you can work your way through the table and find a recommended stocking rate in animal unit months per acre. And then there's an adjustment factor depending on the condition of your pasture. So it shows you how to roughly rate the condition of your pasture. If it's good, use 100% of the value above. If it's excellent, use another 33%. Here's just some more species tables. So here's some of the legume species. So if you have a mixed stand, like we often do, you can use the relative proportions from your different species and come up with a stocking rate for your mixed stand. If you're on native prairie, we have a couple of publications in Saskatchewan, one older and one newer. And they both are similar. They use a little bit different process. They use your range site and your community, your species, your plant community to come up with a recommended stocking rate, again, in animal unit months per acre. So here in Saskatchewan, Ducks Unlimited Canada does use both of those publications for developing stocking rates on any pastures that Ducks Unlimited owns. Usually when we're setting up pastures, they are new to us, and so these provide us a good starting point. So you can see here we've put in the factors that are used in the table. So then we'll have an animal unit months per acre. That's the number that we'll take from the table. We can multiply that by the acres of each stand. In this case, we're adjusting utilization rate. So in this example, we're using 75% of those rates because we want to leave extra litter cover for duck nesting in the following spring. And we've also adjusted by animal weight in this example. So then we end up with a total of 2,676 grazing days on this half section, which may not sound like an awful lot, but there is a lot of water on these quarters. So you'll see there's only about 180 acres grazable. And then just to give an idea of what that means in the real world, if we have a 4 months grazing season, that means we would have about 22 pairs out there for the 4 months. So that just shows you how you can take the numbers from those charts and turn them into a real number for an actual pasture. And probably the best way to get started on this is to contact your provincial forage council, forage association, or a range agrologist in your area, and they can help you find the resources for the information, and also working on the calculations to make them relevant for your own pastures. It's something that does take a little bit of practice, but if you're looking for a starting point, this is one way to go. Ellen mentioned the BCRC grazing capacity blog post, and so it does have links to guides from some of the other provinces, and it also has the calculator, as she mentioned, so you can put your numbers in there, and it helps does some of the math for you. So although these guides are a good starting point, they do have some limitations, of course. First of all, is your pasture above or below average? Secondly, the stocking rates are listed in animal unit months, which is defined as the amount of forage required for a 1,000-pound cow for 1 month. Most people find this kind of a confusing term and a number to use off the start. And I might even say that the range science community did a little disservice by choosing AUMs as the stocking rate standard. But most of us would be more comfortable talking about animal unit days or grazing days per acre. And the nice thing is you can just multiply AUMs by 30 to get to your grazing days per acre. And then thirdly, these charts are assuming continuous grazing, where you're putting a herd out in the pasture for 5 months of the year and not really managing how they graze during that time. So if you are using all of the grazing principles, including rest periods and distribution and timing of grazing, you can get your productivity up quite a bit. And obviously, in those cases, your stocking rates are able to go up. And that's some of the things that Ryan talked about earlier. So you're probably wondering, how good are these numbers actually? Are they really useful? And I would say that in my experience, they're actually pretty good. They're conservative, but I would say that they are actually useful. I've worked with quite a large number of ranchers over the years, where we would calculate the recommended stocking rate and compare that to what they were actually doing. And pretty consistently, I found across a broad swath with grazing clubs and people who grazed in the provincial forest, pretty consistently found that they were usually grazing between 20% and 50% over what would be recommended through those guides. And also, they were usually leaving less litter behind than would be recommended as well. So I think the numbers are actually reasonably close. Occasionally, I would find where the actual stocking rates were double what would be recommended, and typically this is what their pastures would look like if that was the case. Unless they had other factors such as grazing management or maybe really good soil fertility that were allowing them to get a lot higher stocking rates. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here now and talk a little bit about my experience with record keeping on my own custom grazing operation. So we're in Northwest Saskatchewan near Rockhaven, and these maps show a couple of our grazing blocks of pasture. And we're typically grazing cattle for 5 months from the middle of May till late October each year. For us, keeping records is a very valuable tool, and I wouldn't be able to manage in the way that I want to without keeping records. This is a cleaned up version of the Excel spreadsheet that I use for keeping track of things. I want to start by just emphasizing that it's not really important how the spreadsheet works or what the numbers are, but or that it's done on computer. You could easily do this on paper for sure. But what is valuable is just doing some planning and then keeping track of things so that you can use that information. And then adjusting it over time and replanning and making sure you're recording what actually happens. So you saw on the previous slide that we have paddocks of all different sizes, and of course they're all different qualities as well. We're mostly operating on native prairie or quite old tame pastures, and we do have some soil limitations as well. And so so what I've done in the spreadsheet here is I've got each paddock name, the acres of them, dates in and out, and the number of heads. So then we can calculate the days per acre. We also own and rent some of our land, so it can easily keep track of that. From year to year, we might have herds coming in of different sizes. We might have yearlings, we might have big cows and calves. We might have smaller cows with really young calves. And so I can adjust for those factors to always be planning for and recording apples and not oranges. And then also these tables can keep track by herd and also by landowner, so that it helps me when it comes time for land rental payments and invoicing our clients. I also keep track of totals from year to year, so I can easily track trends over the years. So for example, you can see the totals here on the bottom. So we had sort of a nice steady climb over the first number of years, and then now we've reached a little bit of a leveling out period. Obviously that changes a little bit depending on what herds we're working with, but that allows me to watch trends over time in each individual and also our totals. I also try and keep track of I do keep track of our rainfall, and I like to try and make notes about that each season, how the season has gone, and then also some notes about what the pastures were like at the end of the season. Was I happy with them? Was there any that maybe could have used more or should have used less? And then we can crunch that information down also into dollars per acre gross income, which is a starting point for determining our profitability. So I guess I would repeat that I don't feel that having elaborate records is very important. You need to just do whatever you have time for and sort of suits your goals and your abilities. But what is really valuable is planning things out and then monitoring your pastures, replanning, and then keeping track of what you're actually doing. And once you have a few years under your belt, it really does give you a lot of confidence in dealing with change or setting things up for the future. One of the things I did want to mention is that we do plan out our entire grazing season before the season begins. So depending on the herd size, what we're looking for a recovery period. So in this example, we had a 68-day recovery period from when they left the first paddock to when they were back there again. And that's one of the things that you'll adjust throughout the year, depending on your growing conditions, is how much of a rest period you want. And that's probably the primary factor you should be considering when you're determining your cattle moves, in my mind. And also, you can, because you're planning your whole season out, you can also plan it by the calendar. And I don't mean by that I want to move on certain dates, but I might have things on my calendar that affect my plan. So for example, if I know that I'm going to be away for a weekend with the family, I can incorporate that in my plan, or maybe I need to be somewhere close to corrals for a branding or something like that. All that can be worked in either in the original plan or as you're adjusting the plan throughout the year. I showed this to a friend a few years ago, and he said, well, that would never work at my place because things don't go according to plan. I have to change things all the time. And I said, oh, no, don't think that just because I plan this ahead that it stays exactly that way. Of course, you're always planning depending on conditions and other factors. You're always adjusting the plan. So I guess that's the points that I was going to cover for now. So thanks for your time, and I look forward to the question period.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Okay, now for our third and final speaker for the evening will be Steve Kenyon. Steve runs a custom grazing business in Westlock, Alberta, area under the name of Greener Pastures Ranching Limited. He currently runs over 1,400 head of livestock on 3,000 acres of leased land. By using extended grazing techniques, he's able to pasture cattle year round. This is done by using a combination of intensive cell grazing, dormant season grazing, swath grazing, crop residue grazing, and bale grazing. Steve has become well respected in the agriculture community for his business management and innovative ideas. And tonight, Steve will be speaking about the economics behind an Excel grazing chart he has been using for several years. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Ellen. I'm actually got a pre-recorded video tonight, and I'm going to share my screen. So that means if anybody has a question, I'm available in chat during the presentation. If you got something pressing, if you want to ask me, I'm able to answer it during chat. So I will just share it here. Everybody can see that?
Yep.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to look at the grazing chart. And one of the big reasons I manage my operation with a grazing chart, and not only for the planning and the being able to figure out graze period and rest period and help with my management that way, it also is a yield calculator. It allows me to figure out the profitability on each individual paddock or each individual piece of land that I have, maybe an area or a group of paddocks together. And that's very powerful down the way to figure out, are we making some money on these ones, or should we, if we're going to take on new land, if we've got a history of land similar to it, we can make some good decisions about how much rent to pay, things like that, the distance between traveling to that pasture. All of those can really help us make good decisions if we understand the economics behind it.
So let's look at the grazing profit center. Now, in this example, we're pretending that we're a custom grazer. Even if you own the land and you own the cattle and you do the grazing, we have to separate that into 3 distinct profit centers, whichever hat you're wearing, because the option is you could be all 3. You could have someone who's a landowner. You could have a custom operator who rents the land and does the grazing, and then you could have a livestock owner that sends the livestock to the custom grazer. So 3 distinct profit centers. So we're just going to look at the one in the middle. We're wearing our grazing profit center hat. Even if you have all 3, if you're the manager of all 3 of those profit centers, we break them into separate ones. So we're just going to look at the one grazing profit center today.
So this is a picture of a grazing chart. It's my paper version. You can see how we, fill in the squares and keep track of the days that you're on each pasture. Really good for planning rest period and graze period. You can kind of see some of those paddocks that the filled in part is the graze period. Then there's a gap in the middle of nothing. That would be my rest period. When I'm first planning this, I would basically just maybe draw a line across the square and try and plan out that grazing period. Now I would have a map obviously beside me too, so I can keep track of the direction of moves, because that animal movement is so important in this too. Because I like to vary how I move and where I move as well, change it up a little bit every year. But it's really good for planning, certain times of the year and things like that. But when I actually do the grazing, then I would fill it in, and this is what actually happened. So what you're seeing here is what actually happened, and then I can calculate out the math. Now, the paper version, of course, is not as easy because you have to do all the math by hand and use a calculator. And if you ever change something, then it, you've got to go back and erase the answers and recalculate it all the way through. Now this is much easier to do on a bigger version of this. You kind of blow it up, make it bigger, maybe even on the wall. Because if you try and do this on one piece of paper, this chart's the squares are way too small. But yeah, the downside is definitely you have to redo all the math yourself if you ever change something or adjust something, or if you made a mistake, it carries through and you have to correct all the way through. Now I did build an Excel version of this, which makes it a lot easier. It does all the math for you. You change one number, everything changes along with it. So it's very handy that way. If anybody wants the paper version, I do have a PDF copy of it that you can just print off, and by all means you can use this on the paper version as well. But the Excel version is way nicer and a lot easier to adjust and play and change things around. So yeah, I have both copies if anybody wants them.
So this is my Excel version of my grazing chart. As long as you have a basic understanding of Excel and how that works, it shouldn't be that difficult to figure out. But it calculates things automatically for you, which is a lot easier than doing it by hand on a piece of paper. So this is the first page that comes up. It's the instructions page. So you guys can run through this when you get it. We start here with the basics. So our cell name, so this is Avery One's pasture, 803 acres, and the year was 2017. Okay. Now down on this side here, we can put in our paddock names and our paddock sizes. Okay. So if you notice that there's 5 here that are colored gray, and then 5 that are white, 5 that are gray, and then 5 that are white. Okay, so those, what I try and do is put paddocks of similar types together. Maybe they're from the same landowner, or maybe they're, all 3 of these are open land, whereas these 2 are bushland. Okay, so what that's for is for calculating later, because it calculates them together as a group. So we don't have to calculate every individual piece by itself. You can start to see as an area, what does the bush produce versus what does the open land produce? What is the margin on this landowner's land compared to this landowner's land? Okay, so you can start to compare that at the end. But just so you know, that's why we've skipped a couple here, because they calculate together. So all the way down, we've got 18 paddocks, and I've got all the acres and everything inputted there. Okay, because in Alberta we don't start grazing in January, we're going to kick ahead to May, because that's when we're going to start grazing. Now all of those numbers transfer through to every one of these pages. Okay, so you see the dates across the top here and the paddocks down the left hand side. Okay, you notice I'm filling in, we started grazing on May 15th in paddock 6. Okay, so I just put a number 1 in. Right? Instead of on a paper grazing chart, you fill it in, you darken it in. Well, on this one, I just put a number 1 because we've got to do some math here. So that number 1 is part of the equation. So that's important. Don't put anything else in there. It's got to be a number 1. So the key to this, though, is down below. We have to figure out our animal day value. Okay, our animal day value is this line number 50 all the way across. But we got to do some calculations before then. There's the 15th. I've got 361. Now, how did I get that number? Okay, so on date in, this is where I do my calculations. This is a separate little area. I put in, on May 15th, we put in 206 cow-calf pairs at a value of 1.75. Now, it rounded up on me here because it's too small for there. But if you go down here, this is just a bit of a reference chart. You don't have to use these numbers, but it's what I use. And you need to be flexible with them. You need to adjust them according to your situation, not necessarily what I'm doing. But my base animal day is a 700-pound yearling right here. So 1 AD is how much one yearling will eat in a day. Okay, so a smaller yearling will eat less. Okay, they'll only eat 1.75. A larger yearling will eat 1.25. So if you can do math with quarters, then you can easily do this. Remember I said earlier that a cow-calf pair will eat twice as much as a yearling. Well, that shows here. So this yearling is 1 AD. A cow-calf pair with a 300 to 400-pound calf by its side will eat 2 AD. Okay, 2 animal days. So a small calf would be 1.75 and a large calf would be 2.25. Okay, so pretty easy math. Now this is based on a 1,200-pound cow. So if you have bigger cows, you might want to bump this up a little bit. Or, one year you might have smaller cows and the next year you have bigger cows. So you want to adjust accordingly. You're just comparing your numbers to your numbers. So be as honest as you can. My numbers aren't going to compare to yours. So all you're trying to do is get a reference on your pasture. So you've got to try and make this work. A dry cow is worth 1.5 in this example. A bull 2, and maybe not breeding, he'd be worth 2.5. Okay, so you guys can use this if you want to, or use your own numbers. That's up to you. But from there, so I said we've got May 15th, we just finished calving. We've got small calves out there. So that's where I said 1.75. So if we go back up here, this 1.8 is technically 1.75. So 206 animals times 1.75 gives me 361 animal day total for 1 day's worth of grazing. So that's how much forage is being removed in 1 day. So that's where we have to transfer this number to. You have to manually do this. You just type it in there. Then all of the other ones should change because it's all a formula. So you've technically deleted the formula on the 15th, but then it carries on after that. So this 361 now multiplies by 1 right here and it does it twice actually to give us 722. Okay, so that's just a simple math equation. It comes up and goes down. So that's why you have to put in a number 1. Don't put a 2 or an L or anything else. It's got to be a number 1. Okay, and then it adds up across here. We'll talk about the fertilizer value maybe later. But so every paddock, so we grazed paddock 6, and then we went to paddock 5, then we went to paddock 4, then we did a day in paddock 3, paddock 2, paddock 1, down to paddock 7, and into paddock 8. Okay, so we finished off May in paddock 8. Okay, let's go to June. June we started in paddock 11, and we carried on. You can see how we carried on, and then we came back up to here. And the whole time, our animal day value carried on, and it's doing the math for us. Okay, so that's our June. Let's go to July. Oh, something happened in July though. So our grazing's the same. We just kept going in our rotation, but let's look down below. In July, we changed our animal day value. Okay, we added some bulls. Okay, so we added in 8 bulls at a value of 2.25. It rounds up. And the pairs, we decided, well, those calves are getting a little bigger by July, so let's bump up their value. They're eating more now than they did a month ago. So we're going to bump up this animal day value a little bit to 2. Okay, same as down here, we went from the cow-calf pair at 1.75. Now we're going to put her in at 2. Okay, so go back up here. So now we've got 412 for the cows, 18 for the bulls, a total of 430. So we just go down here and make sure whatever day we pick, it doesn't have to be the first, but to make it simple, I did the first. We switch that to 430, and then the formula carries it on. It just copies it out. And again, let's look at, let's go to the 15th here just for fun. So 430 times our 1, but we did it 4 times, gives us 1720 over here. Okay, so that just carries on. Every day you're grazing on a paddock, you put in a number 1. So August, same thing. You can see the rotation. September, see the rotation. And we changed things a little bit here. Now we've got our cow-calf pair is worth 2.25. So it rounds up to 2.3. But 2.25 times 206 gives us 464. And the 8 bulls still at 2.25 gives us 18. So we're now at 482. And we did that on the 1st as well. So a few times during the year, I bump them up. If you want to be more precise, you can do it more often, but it's just a little bit more work. So a couple times during the year, and I'm pretty close to what we're grazing. So all those numbers go up a little bit more, but we still kept through our rotation right till the end of September. Let's look at October. October, we got rid of the bulls. Bulls got pulled. So we've now got 206 cow-calf pairs at 2.25 gives us 464. So our 464 carries on and does the same thing, calculates out our with all our 1s and gives us our numbers over here. And I believe we're done in October. November has nothing. So we finished grazing on, looks like October 30th, right at the top, paddock number 1. Okay, let's go to December. It should be empty as well. Yep, empty. And we'll move to our summary. So with our summary, it kind of looks confusing, but this is just all the data that transfers forward. Our real numbers are right in here. This is what we need to look at. Okay, so this column is our total animal days, so we can see each paddock on, how many animal days were harvested off each paddock. Now this doesn't really tell me much yet because I don't know, I haven't divided it by the number of acres. So the next column divides by the acres and gives us a total animal days per acre, right? This is a valuable number to me. So 234 is better than 174. Okay, we're getting more production out of this one. 251 is even doing better. Okay, 258, 179, 195, right? We can start to compare them. 55 and 61, what's with those paddocks? I would say they're probably bush paddocks. They don't produce as much. So 35 and 49 as well. Probably a bush paddock. It's not going to produce as much. We're back up to 115 and 111, 163, right? So carried all the way down here. All these different paddocks and what they produce. We can then convert that to dollars per acre. So the next column gives me $1 per acre. Okay. Now, before those will actually calculate, you can see those bush paddocks aren't producing as much. But before those calculate, we have to go down to this bottom corner. Okay, this is an important area right here. This is where all the dollar value comes in. So we have to give a value to this grazing. Now, if you're not a custom grazer, you need to put in the values as if you were. Okay, because we're just same as our margin analysis. You have the option to custom graze, or you can send animals away, or you can graze them yourself. So here's that 206 pair. We grazed for 168 days right here, and the value was $1.25 in this example. So our total revenue for this pasture for the season was $43,260. Okay, plus the bulls $1,540, so our total was $44,800. Okay, I divide that total revenue now by the animal days. Our total animal days, which is right here, 72,007. That's what we grazed for the whole season, and we came up with 62 cents per animal day. That's our revenue per animal day. Okay, so that number transfers over here and does our math for our total dollars per acre. 145, 108, 55. Okay, so we start to get some numbers, some values out of this. Okay, and as you can see, our rent ratio here is 32%. If you recall, I'd like a rent ratio of under 30%. So we're right close, right close. I also have this area on the right-hand side, our gross margin calculator. So now that's when we take these 5 paddocks, or technically 3 here, but the gray area will calculate together, the white area calculates together, the gray area calculates together, and so on. So this first little group of paddocks, we got a gross revenue per area of $132. Our rent was $25. Our grazing costs, which remember we did our pasture cost calculator, that would be your water systems and your fencing and your grazing labor and your spring setup labor and all those things. I can figure them out on a per quarter or per area basis and put them in here. So I've got $35 an acre there. And so my gross margin is $71 an acre. My ratio, or gross margin ratio, is 54%. And my rent ratio is 18.9%. Okay, so both those numbers are pretty good. Next piece, 127. Rent's a little higher here. Different landowner, obviously. Gross margin was 79, 62%, and 23%. Okay, so I want this over 40%, and I want this under 30%. So still, both are really good. How about this one? Rent is a little cheaper. It's only $15 an acre. Grazing costs were $17, and my gross margin is $3.53. That's not very good. So my gross margin ratio is 9.8%, and my rent ratio is 41.6%. So this one's not doing very well. Why? Because it's a bunch of bushland, right? I'm going to tell you right now, I don't make much money on my bushland. Next one, same thing. So my rent's even cheaper here. Again, another, looks like 2/4 sections of bush. They're both 160 acres. And we actually lost money on those ones because we paid the same rent. It was one charge for the whole piece of land. So sometimes we just absorb those ones because the bush comes with the open land. But yeah, that one's not doing very well. My ratios are, one ratio is even in the negative. So, and yeah, so on. Same thing here, 42 and 36. So that rent is a little high, that one. My gross margin ratio is good, but the rent is too high. So I can start to determine, is it my costs that are too high, or is it my rent that's too high? In that case, yeah, I need to go negotiate with that landowner a little bit. And same here, 40 and 35. Could negotiate there a little bit. But overall, pretty happy with this pasture.
And that's basically the economics behind a grazing chart. Very powerful, very handy tool to be able to understand the economics on your grazing profit center. Now, if anybody wants a copy of either of those, I'm happy to give them out. I give them out for free. If you email me at skenyon@greenerpasturesranching.com, just ask me for the grazing chart, paper version or electronic. I'm happy to send them out. So yeah, thanks for watching, and God bless.
was bound to forget unmute at some point. Okay, so we've had lots of discussion already in the chat, and I see that we have some questions in the Q&A box. Now we will take your questions and get our three presenters to answer some of your questions. So if you've had some burning questions throughout the presentations, feel free to drop those into the Q&A or into the chat right now, and we'll start working through those. Okay, so this one was early on. This one was for Ryan. What was the name of that first app that you had mentioned in your presentation? If I can get all three presenters to turn your video and your mics back on, please.
Yeah, so the app that I was mentioning that we use to calculate area, I think that's the one you're referring to. It's simply just called Area. So if you go to the App Store, Google free area calculator, it should come up. It's that blue symbol, says area on the top. Or that's the name of it. It's just simply area. So that was an easy one. Let's keep those ones coming.
I think this one's also for you, Ryan. How do you cope with the risk of bloat? The last picture in that part of the presentation looked like it was straight alfalfa.
We don't worry too much about bloat. We just simply try to manage the alfalfa so that we are grazing it once it starts to flower. As long as there's any flowers on it, we don't really worry too much. We try to make sure the cattle aren't being abruptly moved into alfalfa when it's wet or early in the morning. We wait till afternoon when the sugars are higher in the alfalfa. And we will supplement straw if we think it's high risk, like just give free choice straw in the paddock. Yeah, I don't know. It's just something that we've learned to deal with. We certainly had bloat. We learned real quick what not to do when grazing alfalfa, but now we don't think twice about it, really.
Okay, this question could be for Ryan or any of our speakers. Have you noticed a decrease in conception rates with a move to high intensity grazing?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's the first thing that you'll see drop in animal performance when you adapt a system like what I'm referring to as this ultra high stock density, severe non-selective grazing. You will see a drop in performance if you don't manage it properly. So did we see that? Yeah, we did. We saw a reduction in conception rate on our yearling heifers and a little bit on the cows too. But so our long-term plan is to focus a lot more on selecting the animals that do perform in that program. And in the meantime, dialing in our supplement to maintain a level of performance that's desirable. We've also considered, instead of the long recovery period, moving back, like shortening that up. So grazing some of that lush regrowth from paddocks that might have been grazed in May, we're breeding in August, end of August, September. So it's something you absolutely need to be aware of and weigh the cost against overall profitability of the grazing system. Like we're able to achieve a higher stocking rate and rapidly increased landscape function. So we figure it's somewhat of a short-term pain, but it's long-term gain, and we soften that blow with the animal selection and supplement.
Perfect. For any of the speakers, has anyone tried to follow rotation with sheep? Has anyone used other livestock in their rotation?
I've used goats before along with sheep.
Okay.
On a small scale, but the type of livestock shouldn't matter. Your fencing is going to change. The grazing concepts, the principles stay the same no matter what the type of livestock. We've grazed chickens, we've grazed pigs, we've grazed sheep, we've grazed goats, cattle, horses. I mean, the concepts stay the same if you're managing for forage or for soil. The livestock, how you're going to move them, the type of fencing you use might change, but the concepts on managing the grass and the soil would stay the same.
Perfect. There's been a number of questions about rest periods. Can each of you kind of touch on rest periods briefly, how to go about determining those and working on those? There's not really one specific question. There's been a few different questions around that, but if you can touch on rest periods.
Well, I can start there if you'd like. How do we determine our rest period? We want the animal or the forages to be adequately recovered, fully recovered. But further to that, what is our goal for the pasture? Are we trying to increase the diversity of that stand? Are we trying to increase the density of the plants, improve the tiller density on the ground? So that's guided us to a long recovery period. So we want to be out of that paddock long enough that those new seedlings have time to establish. We want to allow the plants that are established time to express their full life cycle. The roots get their full glory, full root reserve replenished before we go in and graze. Because we are grazing more severely, we're not worried about how much green material is left in the paddock. We've shifted our mindset to a root reserve based recovery as opposed to photosynthetic. And also there's the factor of how much weather risk do you want? How much moisture risk do you want to assume? So with a super long recovery, like we're talking about grazing once per year, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be hitting a significant storm system throughout the summer that's going to recharge that pasture and equal significant growth. So it all depends on the goals of the outcome of your system and the performance demands, as we mentioned, talked about earlier, conception rates. Like if your focus is on gain per head on yearlings, then obviously you're going to have to shorten up that rest period.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ryan that it does depend on what your goals are for that pasture. Are you trying to get some plants to maturity so you have seed set that you can get reseeding going on, or are you running stock or yearlings and gains is your highest priority? And you have to recognize that it changes throughout the year. So you may have a overarching target for certain pastures as far as what your recovery period is going to be, but during the first half of the summer, when your growth is rapid, your recovery is happening much faster. And then as you get later into the season, it's going to slow down. One of the things, and it is really important, you can't really overemphasize the importance of the recovery period in terms of how you're planning and when you're doing your moves, that it really should be probably your primary consideration. And one of the things that I often see on pasture is that people are, in order to keep their utilization rates up, they're moving fairly slow, and they don't realize that first of all, the forages ahead of them are getting quite mature, which might not be meeting their animal production goals, but also it may be best on their pastures to get through them twice in that year, for example, but they're only getting through them once because of basically a fear of wasting grass behind them.
Awesome, great guys. I would definitely agree with that. Rest period is one of my most important measuring tools, I guess, what I'm looking at. It's not so important what's in the pasture that you're grazing. It's what about that pasture that's a month out? What is it going to be like by the time you get to it? I'm trying to manage for that more than I am the graze period itself. That rest period is so important. And you know what? Every year it changes. Every pasture might be different, right? One year we might have a good year, and one year we might have a bad year. That might change how I adjust my graze or my rest period for next year. Maybe I need to heal this one this year. Maybe this one's done really well. We bale grazed across this one for a few years. I can you know, we can hit it a little harder. We can change between the graze period and the rest period. They have to, you know, be managed together. And yeah, most people just look at, you know, the one they're on right now, that the one they're grazing right now. And like Jeremy said, it's more important to look about, well, you know, what about that rest period? How long are we giving that? Is that paddock that's 30 days out or 40 days out, is it going to be recovered enough, or am I getting ahead of myself? Do I need to slow down? I think that's something we need to think about more, is the rest period. So
Perfect. Okay, I think we'll just do one more question here, but there is still some other great questions in here. Where did it go? Okay. Do you all consider in season conditions like drought in your grazing plan? If so, what does this look like? That can go to any one of you, if anyone wants to start.
yes, definitely. When a drought hits, we have to change our management. Our rest period has to get longer. We have to give more time for those roots to recover. So yeah, definitely a drought changes things. Now the problem is you can't plan for a drought in a drought. You have to be planning for that well in advance. I mean, I plan for a drought every year, and especially on the good years. If there's a good year, I'm planning to, you know, leave soil cover, building up that soil armor to help build my water holding capacity, get that water cycle working. And then when a drought hits, you know, very seldom do I have a drought anymore. My neighbors will have a drought, but I don't, because we've built up that water holding capacity in our soil. I can go 2 months without rain and my pastures don't even hesitate. So it's really important to be planning for that drought long in advance of when it actually happens.
And one of the advantages to having numerous paddocks and healthy pastures is that you can see exactly how much forage you have ahead of you. It's basically like counting bales in your bale yard. So you know, am I going to get to the end of the season or not? And that's pretty valuable too, just to be able to inventory what you have ahead of you, which is a lot more difficult to do if you're just looking at one big pasture and kind of wandering around trying to figure out how much they've grazed and how much you think is left.
Yeah, I think I would echo both of the comments here. Like our drought plan basically goes back to having that pasture inventory, knowing what grass is available at all times, and like a rolling average of that rainfall. So with those two factors, we can tell 3-4 months out if we're going to have enough feed for the herd that we currently have on the farm. And if not, we adjust. We'll destock, start securing feed, make decisions based on that.
Perfect. Okay, so just a couple more important things to let you know about before we go. One is how to get more information and science-based production advice through the BCRC. You can visit our website at www.beefresearch.ca and click on the subscribe button to sign up for our free email list. If you've got a Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube account, you can connect with us there.